girls and boys and transgender if there is any. Let us discuss in this introductory lecture about Islamic studies. You can reach me in the given email writers in academia at the rate of gmail.com. Islamic studies can be one of the interesting subjects along with the other subjects because you will learn a lot of things, a lot of beliefs, and how the Islamic studies and how things works in the light of Islamic studies. You will have many ideas uh, about to see things from Islamic perspectives and how to think as a religious person and how what is Islam and what is Islam about. You will have idea about Islamic studies in this course or in this series of lectures. This was the introductory. This is the introductory class, introductory lecture, and then and more lecture from now onwards. I will be delivering lectures in audio form, or I will be using slides. But I will prefer the audio format because these will be easily accessible, which I will discuss in last. So now how we can what will be our strategy to tackle Islamic studies. Actually, first let me discuss the contents with you, that and what we will do in this subject and what we will cover. We will discuss about Islamic studies. In Islamic studies, we will discuss about Islam and then importance of Islam in our daily lives, and then some basics worships like fasting, praying, and performing pilgrimage, etc. And then we will and then we will go towards the Sira of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and then we will discuss him as a diplomat, as a war strategist, as a peacemaker, and we will discuss multiple dimension of his personality, and then we will discuss some contemporary issues. Now an important question can emit from our mind, that how to prepare, what should be our planning to prepare this wonderful subject and have a clear concept about Islamic studies. So let us have some general discussion, and in general discussion actually it is highest rate of failure at the examination, and I have also discussed the syllabus with you and recommended now recommended I would like to tell you about recommended books. Recommended books are Islamiyat O level, one of the best books, Introduction to Islam by Professor Hamid, and then Islamic Studies by Karim Dad, and then The Seal Nectar by Safiur Rahman. And you can also watch videos, short videos, and use safe platform and other to have better understanding of this amazing subject. Now, how we can prepare this subject? We should, first of all, I would like to tell you that stick to syllabus. You have to uh, focus on your syllabus. Then you can cover this subject in 2 3 weeks. To prepare this subject, you will need 2 3 weeks. And if you give 3 days per section, now you know we have to uh, prepare comprehensive notes and other to revise for examination. And we will use heading. You should have to use headings and subheadings and other to have clear understanding and ease in learning process. You should also have to separate references from the Holy Quran and Hadith, and also you should have to learn by your heart some references of foreign authors about the Prophet, peace be upon him, and many more things. Quotations are also important of Muslims and non-Muslim scholars. This will be the first stage in which we will do this task, and it should be your first stage. And the second stage, we will this will be revision phase, and this will be absolutely allocated to revision, and it will be called a revision phase. And each and each topic will be covered with main and sub headings, with main heading and subheading, and single page will be there allocated to each topic. And then at least you have to have 4 to 5 references and of for each single topic and a single page. And you have to go through past paper at least 2 to 3 years per week, or 5 years paper 2 to 3 per week, depending on you. Now, now I'm sorry. Now what things we should avoid? We should avoid controversial issue in which there is controversy, and we should strictly avoid controver, controversial topics. And those we should don't even touch those topics in which there is controversy, because this can lessen your marks. Then can the and avoid irrelevant material. As we Why should we avoid those topics in which there is controversy? Because we should avoid them, because this can lesser our marks. We should also avoid irrelevant material, and we will try to answer. You should try to answer in a precise, perfect, and to the point way. Unrealistic statements or hasty generalization should be avoided, because hasty generalization is a logical fallacy, and you can't comment a logical fallacy in this course of Islamic studies. And there should be no liberal or secular, and as well as secular approach to basic ideas, basic and fundamental beliefs and rituals will be strictly prohibited, and this will be unwanted, because you can't apply secular and liberal approach to these basic beliefs and fundamental beliefs. Now, let me give a hint that there in the examination and the paper there must be one question from the life of Prophet, peace be upon him, and pillar of Islam, or Islamic code of life and contemporary issues. So you should have to go through these topics with more depth, because one question must be from life of number one, life of Prophet peace be upon him, pillars of Islam, which are five in number, and Islamic code of life. The fourth one is contemporary issues. As I have already discussed, that quotation and references will be required, and this you can collect these references in one or two per page. With each topic, you should remember one or two quotation. And if you want to write them in a paper, then don't use plenty or many references, just write one or two per page. And I will suggest it write one per page. And uh, remember that references and quotation must be you must have many quotation on the life of Prophet peace be upon him, as like quotation from the book by Michael Hart, The 100, etc. And at this this was the third number, that things that we should avoid. And the last one is apply VMOSA and SWOT analysis. V, vision, mission, objective, strategy, and action plan, and strength, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. If you before going and before going towards that subject, you must apply these, that what are your strengths and what are your weaknesses, what are your what is the opportunities that you have, and you can play on your strength. Like for example, if you can remember the verses like وَقُلْ جَاءَ الْحَقُّ وَزَهَقَ الْبَاطِلُ إِنَّ الْبَاطِلَ كَانَ زَهُوقًا. And if you can remember such verses, then this will be your strength and you can play, and this can bring good news to you. But if you are weak, then you should try and bring something which then you can just build it strong. If you are weak and memorizing the verses from the Holy Quran, as I have mentioned. So this was things about the lecture. And then now, why this lecture? An important question is that why this lecture? Why you should go for this lecture, not other lectures? Let me tell you that actually these lectures will be an audio format, so you can and these will be easily accessible. You can use them and during walk, during your walk, during eating, and during exercise, and during having your flight and an aeroplane. You can use this and everywhere if you want. If you have love or wisdom, knowledge, and you want to learn something, and you want to know that Islam and depth, then you can then you should have to listen these lectures. And this lecture I will be sharing some amazing tips with you, and this will be and the fourth one is this will be this is actually a new way of explaining things, because during work you can just go through these lectures and have information about Islam, and have wonderful ideas about Islam that can be very creative and then you will see Islam from new lenses. And actually you will analyze and you will be critically sound that much to see things from the lenses of Islam or Islamic studies. So I like this subject because I'm really interested in this subject from my and I am more interested in contemporary issues, that how we can apply Islamic studies to the contemporary world. Like what is the importance of zakat, and how the poverty, how we can get rid from the poverty through Islam or zakat. Now secondly, if I give you the example of namaz or praying, then this can be fruitful and your health, and can increase your productivity. For example, according to the new research, if you do work in steps, step by step, if you study for 2 hours and then you just take some rest, and then go for walk or etc., and then come back, then you can work in a very good way, and your productivity will be increased. So namaz is a tool to increase your productivity. So how wonderful it is that that your productivity will be increased. We will discuss such ideas in more depth with the passage of time, after going through these lectures with more an analytical and creative way, and we will have wonderful thoughts at the end, and we will be able to apply our thoughts to the contemporary world. Now if you have any question, I am here to answer your questions, and you can ask question from me anytime. I have given my email, writers and academia at the rate of gmail.com. So this was all from my side. You can suggest me things so that I can add things and further lectures. Thank you very much. Be happy and stay blessed.